Hello everyone. Hi. I hope everyone is doing well, and I welcome you to the chat. Obviously today's book is Ta-Nehisi Quotes Between the World and sorry, my internet is being very annoying and precarious, so we'll try and get through this without it going on the blink. I think this was such a powerful book. I've been reading some of your questions and hearing what some of you had to say and ask, and I think everyone feels incredibly moved by this book. And I said that one of the things that I wanted to do was to try and link books that I choose, have some kind of a connection between them. And obviously this is a letter from a father to a son, which has a bit of a connection to Ocean Vuong's book, which was a letter from a son to a mother. And one of the things that I think is the most powerful about this book is that it is this deep yearning to protect his son. And I think what was sort of the most compelling and overwhelming sort of takeaway from this book is that just the amount of fear and the amount of suffocation that being the victim of a racist society or where this systemic racism exists is how much it strangles people and their ability to dream and their ability to see and their ability to try and move forward. And I think that was one of the most, really heartbreaking things, when Ta-Nehisi talks about a third of his energy was constantly engaged in this strive for, making sure that he's safe at every turn and who's going to, threaten him and threaten his body. And he talks a lot about the protection of his body and the plundering of bodies. And I just, it's just so sad that for so many people in this world that so much of their energy and their existence is taken up in this struggle to survive. And it was also quite interesting, I am not American, and obviously this is a very American book, and it's so particular to that place. But I do think of this idea of race being a construct. There's lots of passages I want to read from this, but there's a couple of questions that people have asked, and I've chosen a couple. But I grew up in a very small village in the middle of the country that was exclusively white. But I grew up with this other type of othering where the division was sort of, are you Catholic and are you Protestant? And it's so funny, I think in society, we always try to divide ourselves and we always try to tribalize. But the difference is in this systemic, when it's a systemic problem of this idea that you have to keep a group of people down to have these other people feel like they have the dream. And this whole idea of dreamers was very, very powerful. And this idea of what is this dream that people have and what is it based on and who is it at the expense of. And I remember when I first moved to America, and I love America, and don't get me wrong, this is not anything bashing America. I lived there for 13 years. It has given me so much, and I fully believe I will live there again. But it was very interesting coming there and realizing that there was this underbelly, because I think we all grew up with watching the TV shows and watching the allure of what America is, and like the riches and the abundance and the positivity and all of those great things that are very real in America, but that there is this other side and this other underbelly, and it's not for everyone. And I think that was something that was really just so potently described. Anyway, I don't know, I always feel so weird with this. I sort of like come here and then I launch into a chat and it's to myself, and then I get to a point where I'm like, and I'm sitting here talking to myself and it feels weird. And I'd love if this was like an open dialogue where I could engage properly and you could ask questions and coming back. I'm going to go through the first question. I want to take some questions from live, but so this question, I hope also for our hard of hearing listeners that you can see my mouth properly. I'm trying to give it a broader view, so my mouth isn't covered by the comments and messages. So Jessica Desana wanted to know which part of the book touched you the most and why. It's hard to pick one part. I think it's all incredibly powerful. I have a lot of marks, just because so much of it is just so incredibly powerful. But one of the things that really struck me was the idea of education not being a key to freedom, and that actually the education system was part of the problem. Because I think, for me, growing up in a very small, very sheltered, and I didn't really feel like, especially in my early schools, that I was encouraged to dream big. I didn't really know much of a world outside of where I grew up, and it didn't really feel like a lot of these things were possible to me. I didn't grow up wealthy. I didn't even grow up like even upper middle class at all. It was a really working class, part of the countryside in like middle of Ireland in the 80s, and nobody would even go on holidays abroad or any of those things. So I don't know, I guess it resonated with me in a way, but then also I do feel like by the time I got to secondary school and things like that, like things changed a little bit, and I guess also it's so different, like living in Europe. The idea of going somewhere else and seeing another culture is so available, even if you don't have a huge amount of money, that by the time I was, like, I didn't leave Ireland until I was 17, but by the time I was 17, I knew that I could go to another country and there would be other languages, and, the world didn't feel as closed off. And I think that because America is such a vast place, it's, it's huge, and I think you can see so much of different landscape and different places that a lot of Americans don't leave America. So I guess it can feel very much like you're trapped within that system, and that you don't really get the opportunity to see outside of it. I mean, I don't know if that's changing so much, but I know years ago the amount of Americans who held passports was, I think it was quite low. So anyway, I'm going to read bits from sections that I feel like answer the questions. I remember sitting in my 7th grade French class and not having any idea why I was there. I did not know any French people, and nothing around me suggested I ever would. France was a rock rotating in another galaxy, around another sun, in another sky that I would never cross. Why precisely was I sitting in this classroom? The question was never answered. I was a curious boy, But schools were not concerned with my curiosity. They were concerned with my compliance. I loved a few of my teachers, but I cannot say that I truly believed any of them. Some years after I'd left school and after I'd dropped out of college, I heard a few lines from Nas that struck me. Ecstasy, coke, you say it's love, it is poison. Schools where I learn they should be burned, it is poison. That's exactly how I felt back then. I sensed the schools were hiding something, drugging us with false morality that we could not see, so that we did not ask. Why, for us, and only us, is the other side of free will and free spirits an assault upon our bodies? This is not a hyperbolic concern. When our elders presented school to us, they did not present it as a place of high learning, but as a means of escape from death and penal warehousing. Fully 60% of all young black men who drop out of high school will go to jail. This should disgrace the country, but it does not. And while I couldn't crunch the numbers or plumb the history back then, I sensed the fear that marked West Baltimore would not be explained by the schools. Schools did not reveal truths, they concealed them. And I think that, at least to me, is heartbreaking. That we're not teaching people to think and be open and believe in possibilities, that we're teaching people to be compliant. I think that's really quite a shame. There was another part to this that I thought this is another part that spoke to me. It's about when he was in Paris. It spoke to me because Paris is the first place that I moved to when I left Ireland. And I remember feeling so, I guess, you're unmoored in a way because you don't speak the language. It's not your country. There's sort of things you don't recognize. But I remember feeling so excited. But when I hear his recollection and why he had this moment of loneliness, I thought it was just so, it's just really got me. So I walked to Le Jardin de Luxembourg. It was about 4:00 in the afternoon. I took a seat. The garden was bursting with people, again in all their alien ways. At that moment, a strange loneliness took hold. Perhaps it was that I had not spoken a single word of English the entire day. Perhaps it was that I had never sat in a public garden before, had not even known it to be something that I wanted to do. And all around me there were people who did this regularly. It occurred to me that I really was in someone else's country, and yet in some necessary way I was outside of their country. In America, I was part of an equation. Even if I wasn't a part I relished, I was the one the police stopped on 23rd Street in the middle of a workday. I was the one driven to the Mecca. I was not just a father, but the father of a black boy. I was not just a spouse, but the husband of a black woman, a freighted symbol of black love. But sitting in that garden for the first time, I was an alien. I was a sailor, landless and disconnected, and I was sorry that I had never felt this particular loneliness before, that I had never felt myself so far outside of someone else's dream. Now I felt the deeper weight of my generational chains, my body confined by history and policy to certain zones. Some of us make it out, but the game is played with a loaded dice. I wished I had known more. I wished I had known it sooner. So yeah, that I thought was one of the biggest tragedies, I think, of when people grow up without the idea of possibility and without the idea of seeing their life as a singular thing, not as a part of a system. I often talk, people talk so much about white privilege, and you know, if they're not wealthy and they're like, well, I don't have white privilege and I didn't grow up with a lot of money or things. And it's not about that. It's about the fact that, you know, even when you grow up in these parts of the world where it's tribal, and whether you're Catholic or Protestant or Irish or English or Scottish or whatever it is, it's not the first thing people see. You have an opportunity at least to like say your name, state your case before people find those things out about you. And so it's about this idea that from the minute you walk outside your door, you are judged. And that, I think, must be the most exhausting and the most terrifying thing. And he talks about it, you know, you have to be twice as good. You have to be twice as good. And that idea that you have to be twice as good to achieve anything is just, it's a shame. This is sort of two people were asking, well, more than two people were asking the same thing. So this is Amanda W. and Amanda HW and Senoritav. And they want to know my thoughts on telling this story in a letter from father to son. Well, I mean, it just makes it all the more poignant and heartbreaking. And when you realize that this is a generation after generation, that fathers are so concerned with the safety not only of their sons or daughters' bodies, but by their soul, by their spirit, by how much they get to dream or feel or experience. You know, I don't know that anyone else can fully understand what that must be like. You know, this is part of why, you know, I always say it, this is part of what I love about reading, is that you really get an insight to someone else's life experience. And one of the things that just, you know, was so palpable was the suffocation and the anxiety and the fear that comes across in this, and what that must feel like to know that you're responsible for this little life that's come into the world. And you know, how would they feel, and how are they going to survive? And you know, when you look at his friend Prince, and Dr. Jones, I believe, is his mother, you know, you do everything right, you work so hard, you get your education, you go to the good schools, you give your kid every opportunity, and that's still not enough. And so I'm going to go back and read some parts of it that I felt really reflected this question. Page 21. And this I thought was, I really liked this part. And I felt in this a cosmic injustice, a profound cruelty, which infused an abiding, irrepressible desire to unshackle my body and achieve the velocity of escape. Do you ever feel that same need? Your life is so very different from my own. The grandness of the world, the real world, the whole world is a known thing for you. And you have no need of dispatches, because you have seen so much of the American galaxy and its inhabitants, their homes, their hobbies up close. I don't know what it means to grow up with a black president, social networks, omnipresent media, and black women everywhere in their natural hair. What I know is that when they loosed the killer of Michael Brown, you said, "I've got to go." And that cut me, because for all our differing worlds at your age, my feeling was exactly the same. And there's one other, 113. I really wish this was a discussion with all of us. It would be nice to sit in a circle and talk about this. And Eddie has just joined me. But yeah, it's nice to know that you guys are here, though. Oh no, I'm taking off some of the page. Sorry, I'm trying to find the moment. So it's about the mother of this murdered black boy was then taking her case before journalists and writers. We met her in the lobby of the Times Square Hotel. She was medium height with brown skin and hair down to her shoulders. It had not even been a week since the verdict, but she was composed and wholly self-possessed. She did not rage at the killer, but wondered aloud if the rules she imparted had been enough. She had wanted her son to stand for what he believed and to be respected, and he had died for believing his friends had the right to play their music loud, to be American teenagers. Still, she was left wondering. In my mind, I keep saying, had he not spoke up, would he still be here? She would not forget the uniqueness of her son, his singular life. She would not forget that he had a father who loved him, who took him in when she battled cancer. She would not forget that he was the life of the party, that he always had new friends for her to shuttle around in her minivan, and she would have had him live on in her work. I told her the verdict angered me. She told me that the idea that someone on that jury thought it plausible there was a gun in the car baffled the mind. She had said that she was baffled too, and that I should not mistake her calm probing for the absence of anger. Then the mother of the murdered boy rose, turned to you, and said, "You exist, you matter, you have value. You have every right to wear your hoodie, to play your music as loud as you want. You have every right to be you, and no one should deter you from being you. You have to be you, and you can never be afraid to be you." Imagine having to tell a teenager that it's okay to wear a hoodie or listen to their music loudly. What is Eddie doing? Eddie was using her litter, so I apologize for that. An unfortunate timing. Thanks, Eddie. But I get to share my office with her toilet. This is the way of the world in my house. So there you go. I'm going to do another question. This is Jules Bennett, 22, asked, I wonder if racism is improving with each generation, or if it's more about the environment his parents were able to offer him, talking about Ta-Nehisi's son. And I picked out a few passages that I thought dealt with this, because, you know, a lot of people are talking about the construct of race and what is race. It's literally a difference between pigment in your skin. It doesn't really exist unless we enforce it, and we have created this idea of one race, another race. I mean, we're all human beings. It's not actually a thing unless it's created and used. You know, how many different types of black people, how many different types of white people, how many different types of Asian people. It's like the differences are minuscule, and yet there's so many different people across all over the world. And I don't know that racism is getting any less, but I think it's changing, and I think we have to be really careful when we say, oh well, it's getting better generation after generation. I think it's becoming less obvious, but I think, and I could be wrong, I'm just a person having thoughts, but it seems to me that it's mutates, and that it goes from being overt and people are comfortable with it to then becoming subverted, and it becomes about this systemic idea and why, instead of enslavement, we have imprisonment. I mean, the amount of bodies, human bodies, that are locked away for life, that are forced to work. It's not slave labor, it's incarcerated labor. Is it any different? Should you go to jail because you ran through a stoplight and then can't afford to pay your ticket? And then because you can't afford to pay your ticket, you get an extra fine on top of that ticket. And then because you can't afford to pay that, you get sent to jail. Because this is what's happening in the world. And it's not just like murderers and rapists that go to jail. It's people who just can't simply afford to not pay their bail, or to not pay a ticket, a parking ticket or a driving ticket. That's crazy to me. And the amount of companies, big corporations, that are making money off this incarcerated labor. And I think this is where all of us have a part to play, because as we're discovering, it's not okay just to say, I'm not a racist or I'm an ally. It's like, well, what are we going to do? Well, what we have to do is we have to educate ourselves. We have to discover, okay, well, what are these companies that are using the incarcerated labor that they are getting for nothing, and the profits they are making off these people's lives being incarcerated for next to nothing? Then we should not buy from those companies. We should hold those companies accountable. We have to vote. We have to vote in local elections. We have to vote and make sure that the people representing us, whether it's in your local community board or whatever it is, that they represent the highest ideals of humanity. And I really don't think this is a political statement. And I hate that here in Ireland, in America, that politics has become this or that, either or, black or white, Republican, Democrats, conservative, Labour. We have to forget that. We have to strive to be the best of humanity and elect people who are going to do that. We also should get as much money out of politics as possible, because when there's money in politics, that's where the corruption is. Anyway, I digress. Sorry, I was going to read some more. I also want to just speak to the beauty of his writing and his prose and the way he constructs the most incredibly beautiful sentences. It was a pleasure, even though it was harrowing reading this. It was also a pleasure to read his language, and to hear his voice through his words was quite beautiful. But just talking about this idea of race and has race changed or whatever. So where do I want to start this? I took a survey of Europe post 1800. I saw black people rendered through white eyes, unlike any I'd seen before. The black people looked regal and human. I remembered the soft face of Alessandro de' Medici, the royal bearing the Boche black magic. These images, cast in the 16th and 17th centuries, were contrasted with those created after enslavement. The Sambo caricatures I had always known. What was the difference? In my survey course of America, I'd seen portraits of the Irish drawn in the same ravenous, lustful and simian way. Perhaps there had been other bodies, mocked, terrorized and insecure. Perhaps the Irish too had once lost their bodies. Perhaps being named black had nothing to do with any of this. Perhaps being named black was just someone's name for being at the bottom. A human turned to object. Object turned to pariah. And I think this is, there's other parts I want to read on this, but I think this is what, we all have to realize, is that this idea of othering generally is just about putting someone below you. And Toni Morrison talks about, what are you without your race? And I am going to paraphrase, but she said, what are you if I take your race away from you? Are you any good? Are you strong? Are you tall? Are you intelligent? And I think that's what we all have to realize, is that, this idea of, when you see these people shouting, we have them here, the English Defence League, and, when you see these right-wing neo-Nazis or Nazis, it's like, what are you? What is it that, have you so little in your soul and so little in yourself that it's the pigment of your skin that makes you special? That's really sad. And yeah, I'm going to read some more, because I can't say anything as well as he does. So this is where he talks a little bit more about this idea. The two great divisions of society are not the rich and the poor, but the white and black, said the South Carolina Senator John C. Calhoun. And all the former, the poor as well as the rich, belong to the upper class and are respected and treated as equals. And there it is. The right to break the black body as the meaning of their sacred equality. And that right has always given them meaning, has always meant that there was someone down in the valley, because a mountain is not a mountain if there is nothing below. You and I, my son, are that below. That was true in 1776. It is true today. And there is no them without you. And without the right to break you, they must necessarily fall from the mountain, lose their divinity, and tumble out of the dream. And then they would have to determine how to build their suburbs on something other than human bones, how to angle their jails towards something other than a human stockyard, how to erect a democracy independent of cannibalism. But because they believe themselves to be white, they would rather countenance a man choked to death on film under their laws. And they would rather subscribe to the myth of Trayvon Martin, slight teenager, hands full of candy and soft drinks, transforming into a murderous juggernaut. And they would rather see Prince Jones, followed by a bad cop through 3 jurisdictions and shot down for acting like a human. And they would rather teach out in all their sanity and push my 4-year-old son as though he was merely an obstacle in the path of their too important day. And then there's also this is also something I wanted to highlight. The fact is that despite their dreams, their lives are also not inviolable. When their own vulnerability becomes real, when the police decide that tactics intended for the ghetto should enjoy wider usage, when their armed society shoots down their children, when nature sends hurricanes against their cities, they are shocked in a way that those of us who were born and bred to understand cause and effect can never be. I think there's one more bit that I wanted to it's more about sort of this idea of the dream. And this is about Dr. Jones. And she could not lean on her country for help. When it came to her son, Dr. Jones's country did what it does best. It forgot him. The forgetting is habit. It is yet another necessary component of the dream. They've forgotten the scale of theft that enriched them in slavery, the terror that allowed them for a century to pilfer the vote, the segregationist policy that gave them their suburbs. They have forgotten because to remember would tumble them out of the beautiful dream and force them to live down here with us, down here in the world. I am convinced that the dreamers, at least the dreamers of today, would rather live white than live free. In the dream, they are Buck Rogers, Prince Aragon, an entire race of Skywalkers. To awaken them is to reveal that they are an empire of humans, and like all humans, and like all empires of humans, are built on the destruction of the body. It is to stain their nobility, to make them vulnerable, fallible, breakable humans. You know, there's so much more in this book. I've gone back in and out of it so many times. I mean, there's passages here that just shake you. You know, it's stuff that you think you know, and it's stuff that you think, oh well, I can imagine what that must be like, and then you really spend time and this is, never forget that we were enslaved in this country longer than we have been free. Never forget that for 250 years, Black people were born into chains, whole generations followed by more generations who knew nothing but chains. I mean, if you believe in psychology of people, of groups of people who've endured trauma, and how long that must take to overcome that. I mean, the fact that there are some people in America who don't believe that that this is a real thing, that this is a real issue that needs to be dealt with. But I know somebody's saying racism is prevalent in every country. It's very true. It is very true. And this is, I think, it's also about classism. And that's also one thing that I wanted to sort of talk about as well, because, you know, it's that whole thing of we always feel like we have to have some people down here so we can have other people up here. And that's prevalent, I think, in every country, in every place. And it's not, you know, I really don't want to be bashing on America. It's just, given what had been happening in the last couple of months, I wanted to pick an American author. And I know some of you have said that this is a very singularly male point of view. And he's only speaking from his own experience in a very personal way to his son. And he says it himself, you know, he says it in the book. Well, you know, I'm aware that the destruction or the plunder of a Black male body is not the same, or not to the same extent of the destruction and plunder that has happened to female Black bodies in America. And he talks about how his mother, you know, his wife, partner, educated him about that. But as you all know, I try to do a male author, then a female author, male author, female author. So that's why I would, sorry, I'm seeing some questions. A lot of you saying there's a lot about classism. It's really hard to have a one-sided conversation about this because I feel like, you know, I'm in some ways, I hope I'm preaching to the choir, because I firmly believe that, you know, anyone who's reading this book can have the empathy and the understanding of what that experience must be. And I feel like if you're part of my book club, then you're definitely of that idea. Someone's like, girl, woman, other. Yeah. I have bought that and I'm starting it. This week I had another book to read for work purposes, but hold on, right, I'm going to answer some questions from here, and then I have another one from here. Due to the present day, this book was... Stop moving on me. This book was chosen. Racism is something cultural all over the world. How should white people help to fight it? Well, I think it's, you know, I think it's a every single day you have to make sure that you're not just not doing something, but not ignoring the problem. And I think that that's something we've all learned, is that it's not enough just to be like, wow, I don't do any racist acts. I'm not. I think we have to make sure that we are holding ourselves as a society to account. You know, and everyone talks about my industry and the industry I'm in, and that's a huge thing that I'm hugely aware of, is how vast the problem is in the entertainment industry. And that is about how many voices other than this, you know, very typical white privileged voice and stories are being told. And it's like, well, how do we encourage more people to get their stories told in the industry? How do we encourage, you know, we've been having these conversations behind the scenes on Outlander. It's like, well, how do we get more people behind the scenes, whether it's on our crew, in our, you know, writing rooms, or in our camera departments? You know, we really had done so much work on making sure there was, you know, so many women getting involved. But it's like, okay, well, are we including all women? Or are we just making this a white women thing? And that's not okay. So it's about every single day. I mean, I think every one of us has to look at our lives and our jobs, our schools, whatever it is, whatever our environment is, and are we being inclusive? Are we being respectful? Are we holding up other people? Are we judging? Are we... I don't know. I think the steps are easier than we think. And I think it's about not being blind and not living in the dream, as he speaks about, and not being blindfolded to the experience of so many other people. And it's also, you know, I think there's a great piece towards the end, and I hope I have yes, this ties in with what you all know is another very sort of passionate subject of mine, which is the environment, because environmental causes do not affect everybody equally. And we know that global warming and climate change is going to affect the developing world probably worse in the beginning, that most, you know, communities who are not as well off are living in areas that are more prone to flooding, more prone to drought. Most communities that are not as well off are living in the areas that have the worst air quality. So this is also where we have power, and where we have an ability to make changes, that if we all do things, we can make this slightly better. And he talks about once the dream's parameters were caged by technology and by the limits of horsepower and wind, but the dreamers have improved themselves, and the damming of seas for voltage, the extraction of coal, the transmuting of oil into food have enabled an expansion in plunder with no known precedent. And this revolution has freed the dreamers to plunder not just the bodies of humans, but the body of the earth itself. The earth is not our creation. It has no respect for us. It has no use for us. and its vengeance is not the fire in the cities, but the fire in the sky. Something more fierce than Marvis Garvey is riding on the whirlwind. Something more awful than all our African ancestors is rising with the seas. The two phenomena are known to each other. It was the cotton that passed through our chained hands that inaugurated this age. It is the flight from us that sent them sprawling into the subdivided woods, and the methods of transport through these new subdivisions across the sprawl is the automobile, the noose around the neck of the earth, and ultimately the dreamers themselves. And I think about this in terms of what we can do. And, you know, I grew up in Europe, in Ireland, and I think about our responsibility in terms of how we've all become addicted to convenience, and we've become addicted to these systems that are so unjust and unfairly affect people around the world who did not grow up as privileged as we did. And it all intersects. I think I've one last question. I was going to do that one, but I think I'll go to here. I'm very grateful that you all came and joined me for this. This is, you know, it's been a really, and I'm back. It's been a really tough, I think, couple of months for everybody. You know, not just with coronavirus, but I think seeing the pain that so many people are experiencing, and I hope that it's a turning point for everyone across the world. You know, this is not a uniquely American issue. I've, you know, been looking at this great Instagram page, Black and Irish, and realizing how many issues are in my own country. I've been trying to learn as much as I can about the issues here in Scotland and in the UK. And I think that's what we all have to do. We really have to educate ourselves to what's going on, and hope that as a society that we can come out of this in a better way, because it's not felt great of late. And I think every one of us have a responsibility to try and make that better. Okay, let's find. So bad at this. There's lots of lovely comments. I'm trying to see if there's a question. Okay. What made me choose this book? Okay, I have read a couple of, and I probably am butchering his name, which is the worst. Ta-Nehisi's essays. I read a few in the New Yorker, and I had wanted to read this book. I hadn't, but he was an author that I was familiar with. He is somebody that I had seen speak before on, I can't remember which TV show it was, but I just really liked his voice in terms of how he wrote in the essays that I had read, and I had wanted to pick a male author, and I kind of toyed around with the idea if I would go with someone like James Baldwin, or someone, you know, an old, you know, someone from the 60s. But I wanted to, I mean, I know this book was written in 2015, but I wanted it to be more current. And I liked the link between the oceans book and this book. And so that's why I chose it. And I'm sorry, because I know a lot of people had a hard time getting the book sent to them, because I guess a lot of people are reading it right now, which actually makes me very happy. Right, now I don't have a physical copy of my next book, and I'm going to forget. Oh God, I'm a disaster today. I don't have a copy because I have ordered so many books of late, and I sort of thought I was going to choose a different book, and then I wanted to go somewhere else in the world, because the book that I originally was going to pick is actually by a UK author, and I thought, well, we've already done that. That's really irritating me that I've so Arundhati Roy is the next author, and it's not The God of Small Things. It's her newest book, and for some reason I'm totally blanking on its name, but I'm going to post a picture of it. And I wanted to go to India for a couple of reasons. I wanted a little bit of a different journey. The God of Small Things was one of my favorite books many years ago. And so I decided to pick her and pick this new book because I've been wanting to read it for a while too. And I also wanted to go to another country where this idea of classism and othering happens within one supposed race, right? And so I just thought that it would be a good choice. And I'm so annoyed that I'm hoping someone's just gonna like type in the name for me so I can say it out loud. If anyone wants to do that, like right now, you would save me. A washing machine? No, not washing machine. Anyway, I will post it. But no, oh, you're talking about the noise. No, it's the boiler. I have the worst office in the world. It's got the boiler and the cat toilet. And yeah. All right, so I guess on that note, I will say a huge thank you to everyone for joining. I hope this was a nice little chat with everyone. It's been, I think, a really important time for all of us to do our best to read, explore, and educate ourselves so that we can use this moment as a really positive, world-changing movement that we can all be proud of. So it is the Ministry of the Utmost Happiness. Thank you. Somebody got in there. The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, Arundhati Roy. All right. Thank you, everyone. Mwah.